listeners, and welcome back to the Magic Story Podcast, your guide to the planes, characters, and events of the Magic multiverse. I'm your host, Harless.
And I'm your other host, Natalie. Listeners, the year has just begun and Magic is already racing ahead at full speed. We are approaching our first tentpole set of the year, and it's called Aetherdrift, and it's already shaping up to be an incredibly exciting set for Magic fans, both new and old.
This set follows a multiplanar race where 10 different teams are all vying for the same very coveted prize. But as we will learn, there's more going on under the surface here than just a simple race.
Okay, so calling the Girapur Grand Prix just a simple race might be a bit misleading.
That's fair.
This set follows our favorite planeswalking pyromancer, Chandra Nalaar, and a new rival of hers, as they unravel the storm that's brewing across the multiverse.
If you've been following along on Daily MTG or our podcast feed, you'll be aware that the story of Aetherdrift has just wrapped up. Now, with a phenomenal 6-episode arc, this story came bursting onto the scene, written by none other than K. Arsenault Rivera, who you may remember from being the author of Innistrad Midnight Hunt, March of the Machine, and, of course, Wilds of Eldraine, which was such a fun set to cover. We actually got to chat with Kira at MagicCon Las Vegas. We got to interview her at a panel a couple years back, and Kira is just such a delight, and it was such an honor to meet her.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite Magic writers of all time, and also huge fans of our guest today. And because we're talking about the set story, we figured we should bring on the story lead himself to walk us through it. So Roy Graham, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. Happy to be here.
So Roy, can you tell us just a little bit about what you do here at Magic?
Sure. I'm the story lead on Magic. So I'm responsible for putting together all of the web fiction that listeners of this podcast will be very familiar with, working with a host of amazing authors and a small army of copy editors to bring those stories from first draft to final and all the way to the card set.
Thanks, Roy. Now, I have a very important question for you that I'm dying to know before we jump into today's episode, and that is, out of all the 10 racing teams in this race, if you had to pick a race team to join, which one would you choose?
Oh, man, there's so many good choices. I think I'm going to be kind to young Roy on this one and go with the Alacrian Quick Beasts, which are the monster riding team. Ever since I was a young boy, and also much of my adult life has spent wanting to have a giant, intelligent, magical animal be my friend that I can also ride places.
Who doesn't? Totally fair.
Approved of the Quick Beasts. That's a good choice. Well, if you can think of a Magic set in the past little while that you have loved, chances are Roy had a hand in bringing it to life. And especially includes Aetherdrift, which is why we are so glad to have you on the podcast for this very special episode.
And because it's such a great story, we're going to recap it for you here today. Now, we're going to tell you everything that you need to know about Aetherdrift's story, the characters, and the ripples it's going to have on the future of the multiverse. Plus, a few preview cards from the set.
So strap on your racing goggles and start your engines as we take you through the story of Aetherdrift.
Join us as we head into the multiverse. Our story begins on the plane of Avishkar, in the middle of the Phyrexian invasion, which, if you'll remember, is an event where an evil empire attempted to take over the entire multiverse. And in our story, a young inventor rushes to activate a mysterious device.
And we learn through the narration that she's seen as a bit of like a mad scientist. She's pursuing projects that others deem unsafe or unreliable. And her current project is called the Aether Spark. And it is theoretically capable of harnessing a planeswalker's ability to traverse the planes.
As the Phyrexian army falls, she realizes that she has a chance to finish her device. But the trouble is, activating that Aether Spark is likely going to prove lethal. But try telling that to an inventor set on scientific progress. Probably not going to go well. So she throws the switch on her device, briefly becoming one with the blind eternities. And then it ends.
So leaving our mysterious artificer behind, we flash forward 2 years into the future and meet one of our protagonists, Sita Varma. But the people of Girapur know Sita by a very different name. the masked racer Spitfire.
Sita, or Spitfire, is a really interesting character in Aetherdrift's story, especially with how she parallels another major player in the narrative. So, Roy, when you're working on a brand new character with Kira or any other author, how do you go about developing them?
So this is usually about creating a fertile space for a writer to work in rather than giving a dictate that they have to follow. In the case of working with Kira, I felt pretty comfortable giving her a prompt. Sita is a master racer, a daughter of Avishkar, and has that fun sort of dual life. By day, she's this prim, proper socialite, and at night, she's the mysterious masked racer tearing up the underground. And I kind of let Kira take it from there in terms of what we'd see for her voice, how her interiority would work, and we could adjust as we went. Sita is actually a really interesting character because she didn't appear in early outlines for the Aetherdrift story. It was sort of only through beginning to build out the plot that we realized we needed someone from Avishkar who wasn't Chandra, didn't have the sort of interplanar scope that Chandra has, and wasn't Pia as a sort of been there, done that, long time, like historical figure of the city. Someone new, someone who represented this bright new future of Avishkar.
Yeah, we immediately get a sense of Sita's character in her interactions here, right? And she's the daughter of Mohar Varma, who is a former member of Avishkar's fallen oppressive regime, right? He's this, I'll understate it. He's not happy about losing his status as a member of Girpur's elite. And Mohar speaks to a very controlling sort of attitude, right? Where he assumes privileges and the power that he had as a person is essentially owed to him. And he spent his whole life exerting power over others, and he did this in a very rigid kind of hierarchical structure. And now that he has lost his broader political power, he is trying to replicate it on personal levels now with Sita.
And Sita knows that moonlighting as a masked racer is eventually going to drum up some trouble with her father, so she's just completely keeping it a secret from him and from the rest of the city. That's why she's masked. But that's going to be hard to do when he's constantly just belittling the new Avishkar government and the actions of the racing committee, which of course she's taking part in.
So Sita ends up sneaking off to meet with the co-captain of her team, the artificer turned rebel, Pia Nalar. And they're planning to compete in the Girpur Grand Prix, which, as we had explained, is a high-stakes, high-octane event with the grand prize of the Aether Spark. And Sita plans to win the device and leave Avishkar and basically be free to explore the multiverse out of the watchful eye of her father. I totally don't blame her for wanting freedom from her father. So Pia is hard at work on Sita's vehicle, which is a high-tech masterpiece of racing design, but she's clearly troubled by something. See, she'll be racing against someone close to her, her daughter, Chandra.
Which, of course, brings us to the big personal conflict of the set. We learn in the next scene that Chandra has signed with the Cloud Spy racing team, winners of last year's race. And she gets accosted by Girpur Press with questions about her relationship with Nissa, who is her girlfriend who recently lost her Planeswalker Spark during the Phyrexian invasion. And we learn that Chandra wants to win the Aether Spark to give to Nissa so that she has the ability to planeswalk alongside her once again, just like the old times. And Chandra really wants to go out and explore. I mean, she's Chandra. That's what she loves to do. She's not really one to sit still, but she doesn't want to leave Nissa behind.
See, the trouble is that Nissa doesn't want to be defined by her planeswalking ability. She's spent the last few years grieving that loss, along with her near-death experience in the hands of Phyrexia. And having her girlfriend so set on finding her a spark has caused some distance.
Yeah, we do get a really wonderful scene ahead of the race where Chandra and Nissa are really trying to express why they want what they want. And while it's clear that there are some problems here, they also make it very clear to each other and the audience that they love each other, and that's what's most important.
Yeah, that scene is so great. And it was really lovely to have Kira do it also. Obviously, Kira was the writer of the March of the Machine main story, which means that she's the one that brought the Chandra and Nissa relationship into the light, brought them together finally. So yeah, it was great to see her bring another dimension to their relationship with this scene, a little nuance, a little difficulty in the happily ever after.
Yeah, this relationship is something that we get to see and explore in this set, which is so wonderful. But it's not the only relationship of Chandra's that's a bit strained. See, she's also dealing with racing against her mother and the inevitable comparisons between her and her foil, Sita. So to put on my literary analysis hat here, there's an interesting parallel between the two of them. Sita feels like she's being forced to be someone by her father, so she's essentially racing to be free. Now, Chandra doesn't feel free unless she's with Nissa, so she is racing to give Nissa that would essentially turn her into someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives Chandra and Sita's characters a really unique texture. So, Roy, when you were working to develop these characters' roles, how do you go about making what is essentially a narrative foil for one of Magic's most popular and storied characters?
Well, Natalie, I think you sketched out a lot of what made the groundwork for the parallels between Sita and Chandra. They're pretty similar in terms of their personality. They're both often driven by like the same impulses, the same drive towards freedom, the same. They kind of have the same passion for what they do, although for Chandra, racing is more of a temporary thing than it is for Sita. In terms of the puzzle piece that really unlocked their relationship, though, I have to give credit to Kira, who brought in Sita's mom into the situation, which when we were talking about this character originally was kind of a blank space. I knew that her dad had to be this sort of patriarch of the old world of Avishkar, and that racing was her way of rebelling against him. But the mom was this blank space, which when you have Pia, who is co-captaining with Sita in this race, racing against Chandra, there's all this mom stuff that Kira picked up really wonderfully, and by introducing this tragic wrinkle to Sita's backstory, where her mom was killed in the Phyrexian invasion. So on one hand, Sita's racing for, her own pride as a racer. She's racing for the Aether Spark, which will give her freedom. But she's also trying to outrun this tragic moment from her past.
Her not so distant past, too.
Yeah. And so back to the story, it's finally the day of the Grand Prix, and Sita, now the master racer Spitfire, is gifted a special racing suit by Pia. And this racing suit is imbued with this special aerosolized aether compound, and Spitfire has 3 charges of it. And this will allow her to briefly travel at super speed, essentially bullet time.
Wow. So alternatively, across the way, Chandra is investigating her fellow racers, and she finds a tiny orange beast held in a cage by one of the teams. This team, the Speed Demons, is helmed by a familiar face.
And this character is Winter. Remember, we last saw him in Duskmourn House of Horror, and he had betrayed the heroes in order to escape the clutches of a demon, essentially, and ultimately failing. It seems his dealings with the dark has placed him in the unholy clutches of Duskmourn once again. And as we saw, the house had also kidnapped Loot.
That's right. That's why Jace was in Duskmourn at all, was to find Loot.
Yeah. And we'll talk about more Loot in just a second. But it seems like Winter plans on using Loot's affinity for planar travel in order to get ahead and have an upper hand in the race.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to point out that this is a story where we learn a little bit more about what exactly Lute's capable of, and maybe why Jace was so interested in getting him out of that vault at the end of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. We knew from the epilogue story that Lute has like active working map of the multiverse in his head somehow. And in this story, we learned that extends to the Omen Paths. So somehow the little guy knows which ones go where, making him a pretty valuable map in, say, an interplanar race.
Well, and also, I mean, we know Niv Mizzet is studying the Omen Pass right now. I can think of a handful of people who would do a lot to get their hands on Lute now that we know he has that ability.
Yeah.
And as the racers prepare, we get to see the Cloudspire racing team all together for the first time. And that means it's time for our first preview card of the episode, Kickoff Celebrations. Let's look at that artwork.
I just love the fact that we get to see Chandra's costume here. Like, it's just so filigree and perfect. It's exactly what I imagined.
Yeah, it really takes a lot of elements of her costuming that we've seen before, but takes a whole new look at it. It's so sleek. It's got such, like, to me, it really feels like it would be an aerodynamic suit, just the way that the angles are in it, the sharpness of it. It's almost, it's very clear that it's made to make her go faster. And oh my God, do we want Chandra to go faster?
Yeah. The answer is yes.
The answer is
yes. We have Cloudspire here, but we also on the left have the Master of Ceremonies for the race, Vin, who, if you read the story, or if you go read afterwards, you'll find that our author had quite a lot of fun writing those like race play-by-play remarks.
Yeah, and I actually got to be the announcer in the audiobooks, and it was such a blast. So thank you, Kira, for allowing me to put on my acting hat a little bit and be a little bit of an announcer in the audiobooks. It was a blast.
Fun fact, out of all of the like jokes and puns that made it into the final draft, I want to say there were like 2/3 more that were cut. So in some ways, Kira had too much fun with that character.
I still had a blast.
Kickoff Celebrations is a common enchantment for 1 and a red that reads, Start your engines. If you have no speed, it starts at 1. It increases once on each of your turns when an opponent loses life. Max speed is 4.
Start Your Engines is a new mechanic that rewards you for aggressively damaging your opponent. Common enablers like Kickoff Celebrations are going to be essential for draft. But Harless, I'm curious, what does speed get you?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, Natalie. Up front, you can discard a card to draw 2. Keep those cards flowing. But when your speed is 4, you can sacrifice the enchantment to give all your vehicles and creatures haste for a turn, ensuring your aggressive, high-speed strategy never has to let off the gas.
And we're certainly not slowing down in the story either, because the racers of the Grand Prix blast off in the first leg of the event, and Chandra right away clashes with the other racers, deftly evading some of the more underhanded tactics. We also get a glimpse at Sita's special racing suit that I had talked about when she enters her aether-fueled state and she whizzes through the crumbling racing infrastructure.
Eventually, the surviving racers who made it through that first bit, they make it to the first goal of the race, which is one of the Omen Paths that allow for travel between planes. The Artifice and Wonder of Avishkar changes into the rolling sand dunes of Amonkhet. And here we get to see the vicious Endriders from the perspective of Duretti, a former planeswalker and, of course, the goblin engineer, most importantly. His haphazard and hazardous teammates do their best to avoid the cutthroat tactics of the Endriders, but there's only so much you can do against flaming chainsaws.
That's fair. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, Spitfire and Chandra are head-to-head against each other, which only fuels Spitfire's resentment. They're very briefly united by their dislike of Winter and the Speed Demons. And Chandra in this scene actually winds up saving Spitfire from like a barrage of ghosts from the Speed Demons. And that is an act that leaves the latter a little bit more confused, but also grateful.
The racers have their competition cut short as a mysterious storm crackles in the sky above with winged silhouettes casting shadows on the ground. I wonder what that could be. And they're herded into a camp. And here we get a really nice humanizing moment between the teams. Spitfire watches as the Amonkhet racers honor those who died in the race, returning them as zombies who proudly now fight alongside their people even in death.
Yeah, I thought that was such a lovely scene and really does great character work for Spitfire, showing us how distant she keeps everybody, both, her fellow racers, her own teammates, and, even her family, the people that she should be able to tell everything.
And yeah, Spitfire is really touched by the Amonkhetti's dedication to each other. And she briefly begins to question her own goals. But still, she's worried about her father's judgment. And Mohar Varma, speaking of which, may have plans of his own. Because from way across on the Varma estate, Mohar watches the race with disdain, unaware of his daughter's role. And suddenly, two mysterious figures break into his home, a Gorgon and a human telepath. Who could that be?
I wonder who it is.
So, the two offer Mohar a deal. If he agrees to help them, they will give him control of Avishkar once more, giving him that political power that he wants back, where he feels he deserves to be, right? This is like his birthright to him.
Yeah.
All he has to do is stop this race, which he already loathes. So where's the downside?
And see, these two are after a prize of their own. They want Loot, the beast with the ability to navigate the Omen paths. Because this is, you guessed it, Jace and Vraska, the duo who have been making these mysterious appearances in the last few sets. And we last saw Jace on Duskmorn, like you said, because remember, Kaito had a brief run-in with him in the depths of the house. And Jace was searching for Loot and Vraska because they had all been separated in Duskmorn. And now the couple has been reunited and they are making some serious power plays.
Let's not forget that Jace abandoned Kaito to his own fate when he
left.
Did.
That he did.
He was fine.
Just pointing that out.
Yeah.
We then get a scene of Jace and Vraska together, where Vraska is expressing concerns about some of the more brutal choices that Jace is making here. And Jace says that in a few weeks, it won't matter. And so they just have to stay the course. They have to keep on going, and eventually this will be over. But the way this is phrased really parallels with the earlier scene with Chandra and Nissa. Nissa and Vraska are both raising concerns with their partners and being met with resistance. But that's clearly a little bit less of a dialogue with Jace. However, both of their actions are clearly motivated out of care for their respective partners. But that doesn't actually mean they're acting in their best interests, right? We can't read our partners' minds. We don't know what they really want all the time. And sometimes we just aren't open to listening.
Yeah. And actually, this is something that I wanted to ask you about, Roy. It's like Jace and Chandra have always been these opposing forces. And if you can think of two most iconic characters in Magic, one blue mana aligned being Jace and one red mana aligned being Chandra, even as allies. And so seeing them compared this way is always really, really interesting. And so, Roy, my question for you is, how do you go about deciding how these characters would react in a way that also feels true to their past selves?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's always tricky in this sort of continuous long-term storytelling. I'm sure that anyone who's worked on like a run of superhero comics or a long-running fantasy series could tell you that same thing. How do you have characters who grow and change and sometimes get worse and evolve while also staying true to their sort of core? In Magic, the colors are like a great way to chart what that core is for a character. You know, Chandra is always going to be red aligned, which we know means she's always going to be passionate. She's always going to be driven by impulse over, a dedicated plan, and Jace is aligned with blue mana, and as a result is always going to be more of a force of intellect, of logic. This person who trusts the facts of the matter and his own perception of things above any like feelings or emotions that he might have about the situation.
Yeah, like if you were a logical person and I say to you, I have a gut feeling and I'm going to act on it, I imagine your immediate response is like, why? Like, give me any reasoning that is logical that you would do this. Yeah. And vice versa. If you're operating out of your gut and your intuition and your emotions and you're really connected to that, and someone's like, well, this makes more sense, you're like, well, but it's not right. Like, how do you not see that, you know?
Yeah, and I think both approaches can get you into trouble. Obviously, that's like a core thing of the color pie, is that they all have like strengths and weaknesses. They're all capable of good and evil, and I think you see that here in a really interesting way. Kira is so good at drawing all of these comparisons, all of these sort of reflections over the course of the story. And then, like you pointed out, the scene between Jace and Vraska really mirrors the scene with Chandra and Nissa. I think ultimately the difference between them turns out to be that Chandra ends up knowing more about the forces that are sort of driving her. She has a better understanding in this moment of her impulses, her drive to do something and do it now without thinking about it, and as a result can kind of step back and listen to Nissa better. Yeah, in this moment, Jace can't get over his own understanding of things, his own obsession, and see things, ironically, more objectively. He's so caught up in his trauma and his plans for the future, and his all these obstacles that keep getting in the way of what I won't say just yet.
Yeah, it is ironic because we've known Jace to be so the logical one, and right now in his mind, he's logical, but he's not acting very logically from the outside perspective. And yet Chandra is actually acting a little bit more self-aware. We'll put it that way. So it's just a little bit ironic seeing that kind of evolve and change in their characters too. It's always really interesting.
Yeah, Jace definitely was like, here's the plan. We are sticking to the plan. Why are we deviating from the plan? Stop deviating from the plan. Get back on the plan. And
the whole way into the seed core, that was Jace.
Yeah. And also, like, to that point, like, Jace has very recently seen the damage that can happen if he doesn't put all of his abilities toward fixing it. I mean, he was one of the evangels for Elish Norn. I mean, that can't be easy to reconcile with or to have lived through.
Might be getting too deep in the weeds, but like it is one of the great paradoxes of blue character, of like Jace as a character, is that he so prioritizes like logic and intellect and a sort of cold remove from your feelings about a matter. But all that really means for him in this kind of moment is that he's completely blind to what the feelings that he is feeling that are motivating him and making him do things, whether or not he like admits it.
Obviously no spoilers, but I would be very shocked if we didn't see Jace and Vraska a little bit more, both in Aetherdrift and...
I have a feeling we will.
I have a feeling we will.
I hope we do.
Their conspiracy to retake Avishkar is already underway, and Mohar works alongside his former consulate members to stage a coup during a race.
Yeah. Also, as Jace and Vraska's plans move forward, there is also the Girapur Grand Prix going on, and our racers are heading off to the next plane of the competition. So back in the race, the teams have made their way to Muraganda, and this is a primordial plane filled with dinosaurs, lizard folk, and scattered meteor showers.
And this is actually a great time for me to point out that we went to Muraganda in web fiction for the first time ever for this set. Go check out the side story set on Muraganda. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely go check that out because it is an awesome story. And so speaking of Muraganda, our racers are weaving through the jungle, and Chandra, our girl Chandra, catches sight of some Muragandan raiders threatening loot and a now captured Duretti. And remember, Duretti is the captain of the Goblin Rocketeers. So deciding in typical Chandra impulsive fashion she decides that she cannot just stand aside, and she actually breaks from the race and decides to help them, even as Pia, her mother, worries that her daughter may be in danger, but Spitfire still presses on. She basically pushes her growing doubt to the side. And in the middle of all of this chaos, racers begin to fall one by one. And that's the kind of chaos that our girl Chandra thrives in, especially with our second preview card, Outpace Oblivion.
Outpace Oblivion is an uncommon enchantment for 2 and a red that reads, Start your engines. And we know what that does. When it enters, it deals 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker. You can also pay 2 and sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to all players without max speed.
And I think this pairs really nicely with the other preview card that we talked about earlier in this episode, almost like we planned it that way. So you play a 1-drop, then you play Kickoff Celebrations on like turn 2 to get your speed up, then remove a blocker on turn 3 with Outpace Oblivion. And this is essentially by continually clearing the way for your creatures, you can build towards the bonuses that max speed gives you. Plus, this card has Chandra on it, so that's a bonus.
Always. Okay, so back to the story. Chandra finds Loot and Duretti in a cage, and I just have to say, why do people love putting Loot in like a prison or a cage? Like this poor little guy.
This poor guy.
Just always locked up.
Get kidnapped.
Yeah. Oops, kidnapped again. All right, so here we learn that Loot actually has a kind of telepathy that allows his thoughts. Roy, is that the right way to put that?
Not exactly telepathy. It's more he will chirp and squeak in, classic adorable fashion. And for some reason, you can understand whatever he says. He doesn't know why it works. No one else seems to know why it works. It just kind of magically works.
Okay, so his gibbering, maybe? His cute, we'll call it his cute sounds. Yeah. So he can use his cute sounds to be understood by others. And so Chandra quickly really takes a liking to him as she starts to kind of communicate with him. She breaks Loot and Duretti free from the cage, and the group is immediately ambushed by one of the raiders, but rescued by the sudden arrival of Pia Noir. Go Pia.
One of the things I really like that builds up over the story is Loot and Chandra end up having a kind of like younger brother, older sister dynamic.
Yeah.
Or like deeply chaotic lesbian aunt.
Yes. So Loot's Omen Path tracking abilities come in handy as he's able to find them a really quick, maybe dangerous escape out of the situation.
And this escape lands them on Amonkhet, battered and bruised in both body and vehicle. They realize that they're stuck here for the time being. And Chandra just basically feels like she's doomed them all, throwing away their chances at victory for her heroics. But Pia does her best to comfort her. And we get some great characterization here as the two women show how they try and help others.
How they care about other people, really.
Yeah. And while Pia takes a more kind of constructed, maybe artifice-centric approach, Chandra is more headstrong and brazen with her actions, but they operate from the same place.
Yeah. So that night, Chandra is haunted by dreams of the Phyrexian invasion. Without Nissa there to comfort her, she just goes off wandering into the wastes of Amonkhet, and she comes to a small oasis. And there she has a strange encounter with this golden, powerful man with a lion's head. And this is one of Amonkhet's gods, Ketramos.
So Ketramos speaks in very strong, powerful sentences, and his divine nature is even shows up in bold lettering. It was really cool to see it on bold lettering on the page whenever he spoke.
Oh yeah, actually that's something from Amonkhet, An Hour of Devastation, that we pulled forward into this story. In those stories, the gods all spoke in all bold. So, you see the new gods of Amonkhet doing it too.
Yeah, it was just really cool to see. And he expresses, Ketramose expresses interest in Chandra's knowledge of the other worlds of the multiverse. And in classic Chandra fashion, she does not pass up the chance to info dump about her girlfriend.
Is it info dumping or is it trauma dumping?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Maybe both. It's hard to tell with Chandra sometimes. But there's this fascinating, almost alien sense to the scene where it feels very dreamlike and out of reality. Kira portrays Ketramose as being born from the plane of Amonkhet itself. And that's something that's pretty hard to portray in writing. So, Roy, when you are working with writers on making these scenes that are a bit more abstract, which we do see in Magic quite a bit, how do you guide them toward making the scene feel grounded in the present while also being true to the narrative?
This is actually kind of a writer-by-writer question. Some of our authors, like Kira, really thrive when given a lot of elbow room in scenes like this and don't require a lot of guidance from me. Others require, I guess I would say, guide rails to get the scene where it needs to be. But I think one thing that's true across the board is scenes like this need a lot of restraint. The dialogue here in that conversation between Ketramose and Chandra gives just exactly as much as you need without losing that deep sense of mystery, of forces moving just outside of your vision that I think you guys are picking up on when you describe it as dreamlike and kind of alien. And I'll say also that, like, I think that it's a really great achievement from our author here to make to bring that sense of wonder and awe into a universe or a multiverse where magic is sometimes commonplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so back to our story here, right after this scene, is that Lute finds an omen path for Pia, Duretti, and Chandra to take back to Avishkar once their vehicle has been repaired, thanks to Duretti. And things are happening off-plane during all this as well. So as racers are pouring through the omen path to Avishkar, Spitfire is caught up in a trap laid by Mohar, Vraska, and Jace. Ugh. And it sends her careening off of the track and breaking her iconic mask.
Revealing her true identity.
And like Mohar recognizes his daughter. You know, like once the mask comes off, he recognizes his daughter and orders his guards to take her away, like seemingly destroying her chances at freedom. It's a really devastating moment for Spitfire here.
Yeah, it's such a difficult scene for Sita to read because she's spent the whole story hiding her true self right behind this mask, and then it's suddenly torn away in like the worst possible way.
Yeah, on the racetrack in front of every single, not only spectator in the crowd, but this is being televised.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
And she was a socialite. It's not like
by her father. By her dad.
By her father.
Yeah.
The one person she's trying to break free of. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mohar, surprising to no one, is really upset about this. And he treats Sita as just a blemish on the Varma family name. Meanwhile, Jace tightens his grip on Avishkar. He takes Winter captive and prepares for Lute's arrival. So with Jace taking control and Sita in custody, things are looking pretty dire for our heroes. And who is going to win the race?
So Chandra and company make it through the Omen Path to Avishkar. The problem is the Omen Path is far above the city skyline. They're sent careening towards the ground, Pia adjusting these ramshackle wings that Duretti had managed to construct. But she does manage to navigate them to the best landing spot in the world. And this is a pile of marketable novelty plushies.
My dream place to land and stay and nap and maybe read a book. That sounds lovely. I'd stay there.
10 out of 10, no notes.
No notes. So climbing out of the fabric-fueled fire, Chandra catches sight of the ringleader of the chaos, which of course is none other than Jace Beleren. She asks him why he's doing this, and he just deflects her with a short, sharp demand. hand over loot. Now, Jace, at this point, casts a sleeping spell on Loot, and Chandra is left more disoriented than before. So I'm really curious, Roy, at this point in the story, I'm not sure that Chandra even knows Jace is still alive.
Yeah, she sure does now.
Oof, that's fair. So what a horrible way to learn that your friend / enemy is still alive. Okay, so the skies above crackle with lightning once more as, naturally, we got to up the ante here, a dragon descends on Avishkar. So Jace tries to use this as a distraction so he can get away, but Chandra is determined to keep her new sentient teddy bears, how I like to think of him, by her side, and Jace uses his mind magic to take control of some of the other racers so that he can dispatch them and just deal with Chandra.
And so Chandra battles these enthralled racers, and meanwhile, Sita is hauled away by her father, and she's left just catatonic as the guards take her away, right? It's such a devastating moment for her. Mohar admonishes her for this rebellion and just crushes her spirits. So as she's taken away, she notices Pia struggling with one of the guards, and her opponent is about to plunge a knife into her, and Pia doesn't seem to have any sort of out.
Ugh, I love Pia, and this makes me so nervous. And Sita also loves Pia. And Sita remembers in this moment everything that she has already lost, everything that she has fought for, that she is fighting for, and she decides that she just cannot let that happen, not again. So engaging her final tank of Aether, if she had any chance of winning this race, not anymore, Sita races into the fray. She rescues Chandra and Pia, and together they form an impromptu alliance that I think we are all very excited about. They're no longer the Aether Rangers. They're no longer Cloudspire. They are Team Avishkar.
So Team Avishkar, yay, finally united, right? Like how we wanted from the beginning, just in time for a dragon to descend upon the city.
Sure, it's magic. There's got to be a dragon.
Right. And the race's master of ceremonies is caught in the crossfire here. And with the attention of the heroes split between so many threats, it looks like he might become a deep-fried homunculus. Really? If not for the intercession of one Elspeth Tyrell.
Elspeth Tyrell.
The Archangel.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Elspeth is a planeswalker who we last saw in March of the Machine, where she ascended to angelic status following a near-death experience at the hands of a plane-shattering weapon. Go back, read that story if you haven't. There's so much that happens there that's so important, and it's just such a good story. Now, Elspeth uses her angelic magic to just fend off this dragon and the consulate.
So Jace grows tired of Chandra's attitude and unleashes a psychic barrage that just overwhelms her senses. And this is a side of Jace that we haven't seen, at least for a long, long time. And I just have to take a moment to remember here that there was a moment with Jace, and I think it was back in the aftermath for March of the Machine, and he returns to his homeworld, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment where he realized that if Phyrexia had pushed him a little bit farther, he would have essentially turned into a monster. And in that moment, in the aftermath, he was glad that Phyrexia didn't get a chance to turn him into that. Yeah. But now we're seeing Jace become something far darker that he didn't want to become because of Phyrexia. But it's almost like he's stopped caring.
Yeah, even in Jace's pre-hero days, he was very aware of the destructive power of his magical abilities. But now, and especially given his words directly to Vraska, you're right. It looks like he doesn't care as much about those consequences. And I love moments like this that really tackle characterization and action in the same breath. We really get to see how Jace has kind of dipped into that darker mindset a little bit and how he is utilizing his abilities. And it's scary.
Yeah, the way he's acting here really seems like it's teeing up some future conflicts. Now, with Elspeth's intervention, Chandra survives, but Jace and Vraska escape with loot. And during this event, so this was all happening and going down, the champions of Amonkhet cross the finish line and claim victory, along with that coveted Aether Spark. And it's really a bittersweet moment here, because Sita and Chandra have survived, but at the cost of the prize that they'd been chasing so fervently.
So Elspeth and Nissa nurse Chandra back to health. I mean, her wounds from Jace's mental attacks, they hit her pretty hard. So we get another moment here of power-based characterization around Elspeth, where Elspeth now has this kind of detached, almost otherworldly, like we kind of mentioned with the god before, air to her. And both Chandra and Nissa notice this as she uses her divine abilities here. And remember, they were friends with Elspeth before all of this happened. So this must feel very different for them.
Yeah, it's almost like she's becoming more of an angel. Right? So let's not forget, she is an angel. So she's going to have a bit of a disconnect from her mortal side. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where these characters are headed. And it seems like Elspeth might have an idea of what that is. And she mentions here that there have been these storms that create dragons, and they have been spreading all over the multiverse. And these have likely been spurred on by the omen paths.
Oh, you mean like in Bloomborough when we got a storm followed by a dragon?
Go figure. We've seen this before. So Elspeth tracked these to the dragon storms of Tarkir. And this is a plane filled with dragons and, coincidentally, the setting of our next Magic release, which is Tarkir Dragonstorm.
Ooh, very exciting. Back in Ghirapur, thousands are celebrating the victory of the champions of Amonkhet. While Sita she's still saddened by her third place finish, but she's now pursuing a new career path free from her father's control. Finally, he was not the nicest guy to be around. She is now the fastest taxi driver in the city. So Chandra is convalescing, but she's still really reeling from Jace's psychic barrage. He hasn't just attacked her mind here, he's completely attacked her trust.
Yeah, and our last scene is actually of Jace and Vraska, and they're looking over the landscape of Tarkir. And Vraska seems to be waning a little bit from her allegiance to Jace, but he's more devoted to his cause than ever. And it's a really haunting image to end Aetherdrift on, but the perfect setup for our next set.
I really like this set. I really enjoyed it. It really takes a super unique approach to a central conflict while still tying it to the broader Magic multiverse in a way that we haven't really explored in Magic before. We've never seen, we've seen vehicles, of course, in Magic, but we've never seen something on this caliber of like a death race. So it was really amazing to watch that. First off, congratulations to the story team. This one is amazing. You guys absolutely killed it. Thank you, Kira, for coming on to write this one. Obviously, we're big fans. But I do want to talk a little bit about how you, Roy, went about developing the story. There's a lot of moving parts to this one. What was it like to develop a Magic set based around a death race that weaved into a multiversal conflict and a class struggle on a fan favorite plane?
It was easy. Yeah, no problem. No, I mean, there were lots of challenges, and one of the big ones for this set was that previous Magic stories recently, in like recent years, have had a lot of genre traditions that we can draw on when we're figuring out the themes of the story, the shape of the plot, the kind of characters that might populate it. And you can see that obviously in Duskmourn's story, which is about the closest thing Magic gets to writing straight up horror. You can see that in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which is, very much modeled after like the classic spaghetti Western. And you can see it in Bloomborough, which is, draws all sorts of like pastoral fantasy inspirations from literature. There's not that many like racing books, so we had to go a little further afield for that stuff and kind of make it up as we go. And I think we did a convincing enough job, even though I learned after the fact, after we had like wrapped up the last draft, Kira can't drive.
What?
That is wild.
Her whole life, she can't drive. Doesn't have a license.
Oh my
gosh! It all up.
Well, when it's a magical, and vehicles don't follow the laws of real world, maybe you can spin it a little bit. Maybe you can.
I never would have guessed that reading this.
I never would have guessed. I never would have guessed. It sounds so realistic.
They say draw from your life, but in Kira's case, or don't.
Yep.
As far as the like A plot and B plot are concerned, you mentioned like the class struggle sort of simmering underneath the surface, the resentment from the old powers that be at wanting to take their rightful place again at the top of Avishkar's hierarchy. That really wouldn't have been possible without the really extraordinary world building done. Shout out to Miguel Lopez, who I think you guys maybe had on at a different time. This really could have been a set that defaulted to more cartoonish world building, less serious, I guess. And the world building team really went out of their way to make it feel like this natural outgrowth of a civilization that, was shattered by a terrible event in their recent history and rebuilt themselves into something better afterwards. And so, of course, there will be malcontents and, people who were ousted from power who would be at the fringes of society trying to claw their way back. It ended up feeling really natural because of the really fantastic work of the world building team.
Yeah, and it really shines through in the fiction. And we saw that reading through the story. And it marries all of these, what would seemingly, as you put it, Roy, like these seemingly kind of almost disconnected pieces. Yeah. But it just puts them together really, really well in the story of Aetherdrift. We have these broader conflicts going on in Aetherdrift. We have a death race with 3 different planes going on. But it doesn't overshadow the more personal beats at the heart of the story that we also got to see. And that is really hard to do.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, even in the first episode, when we are seeing Sita's relationship with her father and how his loss of power is impacting her so deeply, has really shaken the foundation of their relationship, but they still love each other, but they're having to interact in a completely different way now. And it felt so real to what it really feels like to have family who disagrees with you in a very fundamental way, where she's not standing up and giving him a flowery speech that changes his mind, because that's not how this works, right? That's not how it works in the real world. She does this in a very natural way, which is her saying like, we don't call it that anymore, or hey, I don't agree with that, or maybe don't say that around me. And she's really able to show how big this loss of power impacts everyday citizens in different and unique ways. And I just absolutely love that. I thought Kira did a fantastic job of that.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better. But I do want to ask you, Roy, and if you can't answer, no worries. Were there any elements to the narrative that you wish you could have explored more? Like stuff that we could see maybe in Aetherdrift 2, Gear Per Drift?
One word, Muruganda. If I could have a whole main story set on Muruganda with and maybe this is because I was reading a lot of Conan at the time, but oh my god, me and the rest of the world building team, in particular Miguel, really fell in love with Muruganda during the building up of it. We took it from like a couple lines in an article like over a decade ago into something that feels really cool and alive and unique. Go check out that short story for Muruganda, and I think you might agree with me.
Yeah, I think definitely you touched on this, but Miguel would as well. He definitely imprinted on us that Muruganda is really freaking cool and we need to check it out.
Yes.
So go read that story.
Yeah.
Roy, talking with you about the story has made me even more excited for the set to come out so that we can all play it together. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and letting us pick your brain about Aetherdrift. I can't wait for the set, and I know our fans can't either.
So you can get ready for a launch of your own Grand Prix when Aetherdrift releases on February 14th, with pre-release events happening at your local game store on February 7th.
So if you celebrate Valentine's Day on February 14th, make sure you get some packs for your partner.
Good point. So the set is available now for pre-order, where you can get play boosters, collector boosters, commander decks, and more at your local game store, online retailers like Amazon, or everywhere else Magic is sold. Links are in the description.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you, listeners, for joining us on this trip through the multiverse. We can't wait to see you on the starting line of Aetherdrift. We'll see you in a few weeks as we prepare for the next Magic set release. But until then, I'm Harless.
And I'm Natalie.
And I'm Roy.
Have a magical day.